Welcome to Let's Do Lunch, another edition of Let's Do Lunch. My name is Paul Sweeting. I am the founder of Concurrent Media Strategies and co-founder of the RightsTech project. Ned Sherman, who is usually here to welcome you, is not able to join us today. Just let me go through a few of the housekeeping details that Ned would normally cover. You can open the chat window by clicking the chat icon at the bottom of the screen. We invite you, encourage you even to say hello to folks in there, drop in your LinkedIn or whatever. If you'd like to be able to connect with folks either during or after this session. If you are posting in there, remember to change the drop down at the bottom of the chat window to read everyone, so everyone can see what you have to say. And we encourage you to chat along as we're going through the rest of the session here today. Also, if you have questions for our speaker today, you can. We ask that you put those in the Q&A window, which you can open by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. The questions, if you have them, are easier for us to see rather than in the risking them getting scrolled by in the chat stream. So place questions there, and we will get to them toward the end of our discussion here today. Before I introduce our guest, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes here on the news of the week, which, of course, the big news of the week is Elon Musk's apparent successful acquisition of Twitter, although the deal hasn't actually closed yet. It is not necessarily directly related to the kind of topics we cover here, but I do think it is worth touching on a little bit, because there are a number of other developments this week that, while again not directly related to Twitter, are certainly relevant and are likely to become relevant. Among those are there was a lot going on in Europe this week at the EU, the European Union. The three main governing bodies of the EU, the Parliament, the European Parliament, the European Council, and the European Commission, have reached a deal on the terms of the Digital Services Act, which has been pending for a while over there, and that is going to introduce some significant new regulation to the operation of social media platforms that would include Twitter, of course. And some of them are sort of rights related in that it's going to create new standards for establishing procedures for content moderation, including the removal of illegal content or content that isn't supposed to be there. And there are specific provisions that will apply to very large platforms, what they call VLOPs, very large online platforms, which must carry out an annual risk assessment of whether their service is posing a systemic risk to the public welfare, essentially, and to the operation of democratic institutions. It is again going to, probably force some operational changes on on behalf of social media platforms. There were also two significant rulings out of the Court of Justice of the European Union, which is the highest court there. It's effectively their Supreme Court. And one is that they upheld Article 17 of that's the most controversial article of the European Copyright Directive. And they basically rejected a challenge by Poland, which had argued that the requirements of Article 17, which include, at least as some people read it, a requirement to filter copyright infringing content, that Poland and others felt conflicted with free speech. Certainly an issue of relevance to Mr. Musk. And basically the court rejected that challenge, and that was sort of the last legal challenge pending related to the copyright directive. So I would expect to see the rather slow transposition process by which individual member companies incorporate the provisions of the directive into their local laws. That's way behind schedule there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it if it accelerates somewhat now, in that there are no more legal challenges to its implementation. The other ruling involved the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which went into effect a few years ago, which affects how social media platforms and other online services, digital services, manage their user data. And the court said that public interest groups are allowed to, or should be allowed, will be allowed to bring suits, litigation against platforms on behalf of consumers. There had been some question over whether public interest groups had standing, in effect, to be able to bring actions, legal actions against platforms for mishandling data under the GDPR. The court has now said, no, they can go ahead and sue. So I would expect to see a lot more litigation brought against platforms. There was also an important development here in the US that is going to be directly relevant to Twitter. The US Copyright Office put out issued a notice of inquiry, an NOI, in the Federal Register, seeking comments on the development and adoption of standard technical measures by online platforms under Section 512 of the DMCA, which is most people know as the safe harbor provision. But this is a step toward at least inquiring about whether the office should get involved in essentially mandating the use of certain types of certain specific technologies for filtering out copyrighted, unauthorized copyrighted or copyright infringing content on digital platforms. The office is doing this in response to a request from Senators Tom Tillis and Patrick Leahy, who are the two who also introduced recently the so-called Smart Copyright Act, which has been very controversial. And of course, Twitter has had its issues with rights owners having to do with their reluctance, Twitter's reluctance to license content. And there have been a number of DMCA issues raised with respect to Twitter. And all of this is happening, of course, as background to Musk's acquisition, a man not known for his his patience necessarily with regulators, certainly not with regulation. And he's even been known to pick fights with regulators, as he's involved in right now with the Securities and Exchange Commission over his tweets. And so I just think it's interesting that he is buying this for the self-professed, self-proclaimed reason of enhancing free speech online, but he's buying in at a time when the operations of digital platforms such as Twitter are coming under much greater regulatory scrutiny. And I think my guess would be that Elon Musk is not going to find it as much fun to play with Twitter as he perhaps thought in choosing to buy it. Speaking of data management issues, we have a conversation lined up for you today. I'd like to invite Ken Umezaki to join me. Ken is the co-founder, and there is Ken. Ken is the co-founder and CEO of Verifi Media. Some of you may remember that Verifi is the company formerly known as Blockchain Media. And it is a company that helps various stakeholders within the media value chains, specifically the music value chain right now, to share and sort of mutually manage data on rights ownership of music, and to particularly to share changes in that data as they occur, which has been a very nettlesome problem for the industry for many years. Before he got involved with Verifi and the music industry, he spent a couple of decades on Wall Street as essentially a quant, right? I mean, you were essentially doing,
managing trading businesses.
Managing trading businesses on Wall Street. Ken was actually raised in Tokyo, Japan, and moved to the U.S., attended Princeton University, and his fluency in Japanese, of course, helped him land his sinecure there on Wall Street, which I mention only because my wife, who's an American but speaks Japanese, also was able to parlay that into a spot on the currency trading desk at the Bank of Tokyo for a little while. So Japanese is a good skill to have if you're looking at breaking into the financial.
What was it? Was a good skill.
Was a good skill. Now I guess Mandarin and but at the time you were there, it probably was very much in demand.
I was doing Japan Inc., as they call it sometimes.
Yeah, Japan Inc. Yeah, a vaguely racist term, but nonetheless. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Good to be here.
Verifi recently announced, about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, the Verifi, I want to get the acronym right here, the Verifi Rights, what am I getting wrong? Verifi Rights Alliance?
Verifi Rights Data Alliance.
Rights Data Alliance, which consists of Warner Music Group, both the label side and the publishing side of Warner Music Group, Fuga, the distributor, Unison, the CMO. Well, I guess they're not officially known as a CMO, but the Collection Society based in Spain, in Barcelona, Spain. And some of you may remember that Jordi Puy, the CEO there, has been on Let's Do Lunch, and he spoke at the last RightsTech summit. And it also involves Deezer. So you have you have sort of all elements of the value chain there: the label, the publisher, a distributor, a CMO, and a DSP. So what is the alliance all about? What is it you're first of all, how is it actually structured? What was it set up to do? Tell us about the
Sure.
the goals of the alliance.
Of course. So I think the context is we're a rights data service provider. You can think of us as a collaborative rights data registry service. And the idea is to try to answer the question, who owns the rights to the song, in a systematic and kind of tech literate way. And intentionally and importantly for VRDA, make it applicable to each of the verticals or all of the stakeholders within the music industry. So we've been working with most of the organizations you mentioned for a number of years, either independently as a data service provider or in sort of partnership for a while. And essentially, VRDA represents the culmination of that work and an agreement by each of those organizations to use Verifi, one, and become, if you will, a paying client. That's important. Second, an agreement to share data amongst each other, not publicly, but across the, if you will, alliance itself, in an effort to make the data better. I know that's a very general term, but with specific goals around, sort of projects related to data enhancement, if you will. That's two. And the third part is substantially all of the relevant catalog to be incorporated into the Verifi service over time. So this isn't a kick the tires with a few, 1,000 tracks here or there. This is intended to be an implementation of a lot of the work that we've done in the past. We wanted to announce it once we had real firm commitments from these large global music companies. We wanted to announce it once we had all of the verticals represented by at least one organization. And we wanted to announce it when we felt, as Verifi, we were ready to support sort of shared data at scale, if you will.
So what does that actually mean in practical terms for these companies to share data? In what manner are they sharing it exactly? Sure. And how do they access it? How do they use it?
Yep. So maybe first the sort of how this actually works at a very high level anyways, is as most or many of you on this call know, collaborating across, in particular, works and recordings data is very, very complicated to do. And so first thing you need to do is create a surface, if you will, or an ability to actually share data across those two, if you will, broad rights groupings, if you will. So as many of you know, in recording land, you've got DDEX as sort of a communication standard. In publishing land, you've got CWR. They don't talk well with each other, or at all, depending on who you ask. And so there's a data translation service that is incorporated into our service that allows for the data to then be essentially reorganized in a way that allows for collaboration across organizations to happen. You can think of it as, broadly speaking, you have a recording, you have a product, you have a work, you have people who have actually either owned or have worked on those things, so we call them participants, as well as agreements of various kinds. And you can imagine a data sharing technology stack that allows for those buckets of data to be connected to each other, first of all. And then secondly, allow for any changes that happen. As many of you know, there's a ton of activity right now in acquiring catalogs, and new owners show up seemingly every week in large numbers of catalogs. So making sure that those changes can actually be registered and kept track of over time. So that's the sort of underlying kind of mechanism for sharing. The additional layer that's really important is, of course, this is the client's data to start with. If they choose to share, we need to do that in a secure, or if you will, private way. So our system is set up in such a way that clients can choose to share data with either specific counterparties or across all of them. They can choose whether or not certain data actually moves. Having said that, there is a small portion of the data, which we call the public data set, which is required to be shared not just with the group, but also with the public. So the way I kind of summarize all of that is, we're making sure that once you've decided that sharing data is good for you, you get to decide, who you're sharing it with. So you have some control, if you will, over what actually gets shared. And I think that's a very, very important principle. It's very different than sort of the, let's share everything with everybody type of approach that some, numerous other projects in the past have actually had. So.
And so participants can do that on a selective basis. I will share it with X, but not Y.
Yeah, it is in their control. But now the inaugural members here, if you want to call it that, have all agreed in principle to share with everyone else. So, that's but it is a choice. I'm so sorry, guys. I literally can't control my own phone. So, now we are implementing this in phases because it's the first time we're doing a gigantic kind of shared data integration exercise. It does take time. So we have about a year's worth of actual development work aligned across 4 different themes that I think are practical use cases for shared data being, useful to people. The first is basically data enhancement for acquisitions of catalog. So you can think of it as it takes a long time to, whether it's the takedown process or actually just the data management process. Once you acquire a catalog, and we're trying to shrink that time frame, if you will, by leveraging data algorithms and other things that we provide. Filling in comprehensively, both on the work side and on the recording side, the other side, if you will, so sort of a matching exercise, which allows for lots of monetization opportunities to kind of be enhanced and are actually available. Using rules to determine what is the common truth. You can think of it as rule-based consensus setting. That's a theme. And then more direct links between licensee and licensor. Specifically, streaming service wants better data from both publishing and also from recording owners. And of course, the other side wants better data around things like spin counts and so on. So it's along those 4 basic themes is what we're actually in the midst of implementing for the benefit of each of these organizations.
Yeah, now we touched upon this when we were speaking earlier about creating that 2-way data flow. What is the status of that? Is that something that you're doing now, or is that sort of something that's on the development roadmap?
It is definitely something we have worked on already, and on a limited basis, we do have that across a couple of the organizations that we've mentioned here. But what we really want to do, right, is create, and this term gets used a little bit too generally, in my opinion, but what we want to do is create a, if you will, a machine-based or machine-readable environment for this data to move back and forth. So typically the term that gets used is API. And so we have a couple of API development projects that we're currently working on, specifically to connect Deezer's information in sort of quote a 2-way kind of way back to the actual publishers, PROs, and also the labels that we're working with.
So what has been the sort of response that you've gotten to the announcement of this from the industry, broadly speaking? I mean, you and I have talked about this over the years that you've been working on this. You've obviously been in conversations with all of the players, all of the important players in the business. What has been the response to the announcements that you've made so far? Are people becoming more open to your pitch? Are they obviously any private conversations? I'm not going to ask you to reveal here, but just if you could characterize the
Sure.
sort of general reception.
There's a little bit of good news, bad news as it relates to sort of the large music companies. There's the good news is there's maybe 100 of them on both sides of the pond across the verticals that kind of really are involved in sort of the digital supply chain at scale, right? And then the bad news is it's also a small business, and I would argue perhaps cautious around sort of moving things forward. So the response, and you're right, we've been around for, this is our 6th year of operation, so it's not like we're a brand new thing anymore. So yes, we've had the opportunity, of course, to speak to many organizations. So I would say, I'd characterize the general view that people have are some variation of the following 3 themes. One, which is some progressive organizations, including the ones we've announced, and a number of others, actually, I think, have come to the realization, not necessarily that Verifi is like the, like the answer for everything, but actually this idea that sharing data is going to enhance their ability to do their business better, or make more money, or be more efficient, or serve their artists better, or their consumers better, individually, if you will. So this idea fundamentally that, the data environment for music continues to become even more complex. We need a place to actually have that data be maintained. I think that underlying thing has very little to do with us. It has to do with the fact that we're growing like crazy in all these different directions as a digital music business. And I think this plays into that. So I think there are a number of organizations that used to be maybe skeptical that have become more progressive. So there's a group like that, right? There's the group in the middle, and the group in the middle, I feel, are the ones who were like, this sounds great, but can you really pull it off? You know what I mean? Like, this, of course. So I'd like to think that, our announcement is a beacon to the industry that says, you can actually do this. We're going to have to work really hard continually to do it. But the fact that we have some of the largest music companies jumping on board,
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good endorsement to have Warner Music, Deezer. These are
and there are others that we hope to announce over the course of this year. We're planning on adding between 5 and 10 large organizations, and we are in constant discussions
throughout the value chain, or
Yep, I think it's really critical for us to be successful, and also, I guess, maybe viewed agnostically to each of the verticals, to have, ideally we'd have one more large organization in each of the buckets at a minimum, which I think will add credibility to the fact that what I said in that middle part, which is like, oh, wow, there's this organization that actually, in this service, that actually can do this. Great, let's figure out how to work with them. And then there's, I think, is growing minority a term, a lessening smaller group of people than 5 years ago, who I think are maybe skeptical is the wrong term, but this just isn't high enough on their stack, or they don't believe fundamentally that shared data is actually relevant for what they're doing. And I think, to me, there's these 3 buckets. And what I've seen, having been involved with the organization, the entire time it's been around, is the sort of, we're shifting this way, meaning to more progressiveness, more openness, in the right way to have shared data be part of what the organization manages.
How much do you think that sort of change in perspective, attitude toward sharing has been reflects the work that's being done, for instance, around the MLC and the implementation of the Music Modernization Act, which of course includes the creation of a database, excuse me, a shared database to bring together works data and recording data. And you, in fact, Verify, I guess, separate from the alliance, is working with MLC on the data integrity
We're part of
initiative.
we're part of the DQI project, as they call it, which is the Data Quality Initiative.
Yeah.
And we are also a subscriber to their data set, and we use it in our stack, if you will, in our data stack. So I felt from the get-go, prior to even it being put into law, that sort of streamlining payments by having better data available primarily for the purpose of the publishers and the songwriters in the case of the MLC was a massively important and great step forward. And it certainly reinforces the notion that, you have a authority that actually is, you could argue, agnostic. It's essentially a government organization that's trying to do their thing, right? That actually can do that, push that out. We are a private company, so we're not, purely, if you will, a government organization. We've always felt that, mechanical licenses, sure, very important, extremely large amount of dough coming through from the streaming side. Lots of issues in the past that many of you are very aware of, that kind of got solved going forward with the creation of the MLC. But there's lots of other things beyond mechanical licensing revenues that also need good data. It's also a publisher-centric, if you want to think of it that way, organization at the end of the day. And so we actually are.
It was the NMPA that really drove the.
Yeah, exactly. So, I kind of view it as great. There's another partner that is doing the same kind of shared data thing, but perhaps not as comprehensively in terms of where this data can be used relative to a service like ours. So I think all of us know that there's so many friction points in both the pre-consumption, if you will, the data gathering side, as well as getting the royalties to the right people side, or what I call post-consumption side. There's tons of places where, in my opinion, there's great opportunity to provide value.
And how would you characterize at this point the overall state of the data in the particularly rights-related data in the industry? There have been a lot of efforts over the years to try to clean up and normalize that pot of data. Are we getting better at it, or are we just spinning our wheels?
Hopefully we're not spinning our wheels, but I think my perspective on that, I think it's a slightly informed opinion, but an opinion at the end of the day, is we have a long ways to go around the cleanliness of data. I think I do want to point out, we have zero intent of becoming some kind of centralized database for every single thing that's out there. I don't think that's necessary. Now, that's been some of the other, GRD and a few of the other initiatives have kind of taken that approach. We're of the belief, and I think it's being validated by our clients, that we can make their data better for their purposes. And that's actually a good start. Over time, we of course hope that we will have a super majority of the commercially viable music, both on the composition and recording side, represented in our system. We use both client data as well as third-party data to achieve that. We're well on our way, actually, to having a critical mass of data. And the good thing about our approach, I believe, is the data keeps getting better over time, right? As either more people participate or we go through a cleansing process 2 or 3 times. And it's actually there for the clients to use. That's powerful, I think, ultimately, and more powerful, which is you don't need everybody. You just need to make sure that the data set that you're caretakers of end up being in a really, really good spot.
And of course, your system is really, focused on or based around the idea of facilitating the sharing of the data for operational purposes, not on creating a sort of master database. Is that a fair characterization?
I think that's totally fair, or totally accurate. We've also kind of had this kind of mantra inside our company, which is like back to what I said, lots of friction points in the sort of value chain on both sides of the coin, if you will, getting the music out and also getting the royalties back. But we're kind of the belief that we should try to answer the question, who owns the rights to this thing first? And if you have that, even if it's a subset or a representative set of the music, the things you can do with that good data is pretty amazing, right? You can then think about streamlining royalty payments. You can then think about, truly creating in the webosphere world or the metaverse world, like a real royalty generating NFT, and have that be comprehensively understood by the buyer and seller of what it is you're buying, which rights, and so on, right? And there are all these, I think of them as use cases that become easier to solve in a comprehensive way if you have the sort of who owns the rights part figured out.
Just a reminder to folks, if you have a question for Ken, you can put it in the Q&A queue. We're kind of coming up on time here. So if you have any questions, please post them in there now. You touched on this before, the fact that there's been a lot of M&A activity around primarily song catalogs, although increasingly you're also seeing recording catalogs, master rights catalogs trading hands. How has that complicated what you're trying to do, or is it making what you're trying to do even more important in a sense, because there's so many changes now in that ownership data?
Yeah, I think even if you took out the 10 billion or so of let's call it outside money that's coming into sort of music royalty acquisition, that's the number I heard at one point. I know there's been about 5 billion worth of deals done the last year. Even if you take that financial stuff out, generally speaking, I think the trend is that music rights are changing hands a lot more quickly than they used to. There's obviously been a long-standing tradition, especially in the publishing business, of this sort of acquisition of catalog over time. But even if you include that, things are moving more and more quickly, larger swaths. So we actually view this as a very great development, because it enhances the need to understand who owns the rights right now, as opposed to a year ago, or I'm going to go figure out who owned it, a month ago because I acquired it, and the seller's like, well, have a nice day. And the buyer's like left kind of going, okay, I got to figure this out, because unless I have this, I can't repost on streaming services, or I can't ingest it into my own systems. These are all real things that we are experiencing or hearing about through our clients. So I think there's that side. And then the other side is, you got to imagine a world where there's more transparency around the ownership structure and really the royalty collection structure associated with a music asset. Most of the deals getting done today are with a lister catalog, if you will. And guess what? You're scratching the surface relative to the kind of external liquidity you could inject into the music space, based on better data. And I think that's something that's it harps back to my finance background as well. But we actually have a project going on specifically to build a catalog management module for financial investors that we hope to prototype during the course of this year. That's
the financial world, as you know, runs on data. I mean, and it's hard to pry money out of people if you can't tell them where it's going and how much more is coming in. And so
I call it data literacy, and I don't mean this to offend anybody here who's in the music business, but as a comparative, data literacy in finance is a 9 out of 10. And I think the music industry is still in the 2 or 3 out of 10 range. And that's not a value assessment. That to me means that we can actually move the needle significantly around good data being useful for the industry, because, frankly, to put it bluntly, it's so bad.
Yeah, and that's not just an issue confined to the music industry. Other copyright-related industries
Yeah, I think
wrestle with the same
we agree.
problem. Certainly in the video streaming world and television world, figuring out what you own of what you own.
Yeah.
Can
And
I
where,
license this for streaming in
yeah,
Bulgaria or someplace?
yeah, and where is it being streamed? You
And
know,
where is it being streamed?
the UC, UGC world is growing at a faster rate than the underlying content world by a factor of 2 or 3, depending on who you ask. That whole segment has this, you even mentioned the whole Article 17 stuff. There's a whole kind of like, gotta know who you're actually, spinning up in the digital world problem that I think, good data can address, better data can address.
We did have a question from Benjamin Baylor, kind of a operational question. How can he? I guess he must represent a publisher. How can I sign up with you as a publisher?
I know.
Are you taking requests at this point? I guess
I know, Ben. So hi, Ben. Thanks for joining. So what we've done with the VRDA, which I think is the question, like, can you sign up as a independent publisher or whatever? What we have done for the moment is we have I'm going to call them slots. It kind of sounds weird, but we've just talked about how it's an enterprise-centric alliance, but we do want to have independent organizations as well as artist representatives to also be part of the VRDA. So same rules, right? All your catalog, pay us as a service, and agree to share your data. We have about 10 slots, like I said, for the indie community to join. So Ben, yeah, happy to hang out and talk about that if hopefully that answers your question. We do have a couple of, I can't announce them yet, but we do have one very large independent label that represents a A-lister artist that I think we're very close to hopefully being able to announce. And we also have been working with artist management companies, larger ones. And I think that the thesis there, right, is there was sort of a, what's the way to put it? I kind of outsourced my data stuff as a manager, as an artist, to the label or the publisher if you're a songwriter. And it kind of supposed to was to happen. In the era of collaboration that we're now in, very often the artist or the artist manager has either better data or additional data that is critical for that completeness of data. And I think that's actually the reason why I call it artists getting a voice in the actual data conversation is extremely important. So we're hoping to have a couple of those types of organizations involved as well.
We touched briefly on the fact that other industries, adjacent industries, adjacent verticals, are wrestling with some of the same sorts of problems around data. Ownership data and what do I own of what I own. Have you thought, I mean, is it even on your radar at this point to see how applicable what you've built or are building could be in areas outside of strictly music?
Yeah, there's a couple of angles to that. The half-joking answers were called Verifi Media, not Verifi Music, for a reason. So it has always been part of our strategy to approach other digital media asset classes, but for lots of reasons, including our sort of historical pedigree, but also the fact that music in particular is so complicated because there's so many more participants involved, generally speaking. So we've started by tackling the music business first. Specifically, we are whiteboarding with one of our actual investors, who is a film and TV rights organization and does digital video as well. And they invested in us specifically to actually explore how we can I don't know what you want to call it, but not necessarily export, but apply a lot of these things that we discussed today into their business. And so I think that gives us a, you want to call it a beta client or a partner to actually explore the applicability at a practical level of how something like a data sharing environment like ours can work in another industry. So we're actually very excited about that. That's one of the things that I feel we should be doing as an organization, not the least of which is the music industry is pretty small, like I said before. The other larger industry, there are the other larger industries in the sort of digital copyright space that we want to make sure we attack.
Yeah, last week we had on some folks from the audio publishing space, and that the publishing industry is starting to wrestle with very similar challenges because the intellectual property is being used and exploited in so many new ways with podcasts and audiobooks and enhanced audiobooks and podcasts becoming TV series and they're even, I mean, they're a whole generation behind even the music industry in getting their data sorted out. Most of them don't even sort of understand that they need to do it or don't want to confront the fact that they need to do it. So but data sharing is sharing data so that you can so that the interchange of that ownership data across different formats and platforms, it's going to become important there too. So
we you
got a lot of runway ahead of you is what I'm saying.
I think so. Lots of green fields potentially. But what we want to do is make sure that we can bear out at this scale with the real clients that we discussed at the beginning of this conversation, so that we can actually get, I don't know, I call it street cred, but we can actually do this, guys, like kind of thing. And then, for me, like the distributed digital consumption and creation environment, we're only like in the second inning or third inning of this game. There's going to be so many more things like what you just described that are going to continue to pop up. And that's exciting for us as a service provider to these organizations.
Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank Ken for taking this time with us. This was a great discussion, and congratulations on the launch of the alliance. And I hope you'll keep us up to date on how things are going.
Yeah, we definitely will, and be happy to pop on whenever, Paul, you feel it would be appropriate. Again, we really appreciate you letting us in here today.
Okay, we have to leave it there, folks. The next Let's Do Lunch will be Monday, when it will be the business of streaming, and Ned should be back with you to introduce it then. And we'll be back next week. I can't tell you who I can't reveal who the speaker is going to be yet, but we'll be back next week. And then the following week, Let's Do Lunch is taking a break because of the LA Games conference. So you have one more week of lunch, and then you're on your own for lunch, and you'll have to buy your own, as it were. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Ken, and we'll see you next time.
Much appreciated. See ya.